and welcome to the Tao of Our Understanding Recovery Podcast. In this podcast, we discuss mystical works of literature and how they relate to recovery. We hope you enjoy today's podcast episode.
Hello, this is Buddy C. Welcome to the Tao of Our Understanding Recovery Podcast. Here we talk about how Taoist thoughts and Taoist works of old, 2,000 plus years ago, relate to our knowing of the higher power, how that relates to our recovery. Today we'll be talking about, we're starting to use the Chuang, which is an interpretation and translation by Thomas Merton. And we went through the preliminaries last week. Today we're going to start with the first story, which is the useless tree. We're going to see what shows itself in the useless tree. First, I want to share a benefit with you, a way that something that we have for you that's free of use. You can go to buddyc.org and see a lot of resources there. There's a lot of things, but today I want to highlight the nightly online AA meeting of the Fourth Dimensioners. It's a meeting that was started at the first of the pandemic that's still going. It's a nightly 9 p.m. Eastern meeting. You can get there by going to zoomaameetings.com. That will take you directly to the join link. Need to be logged into your Zoom account for authentication. And it's zoomaameetings.com, or go to the aa.org online meeting guide and type in Fourth Dimensioners, and it should pull up for you. And if you happen to come to the Sunday night 9 p.m. meeting, I host and co-host that, so we'll get to converse a little bit. So come a little early and we'll get to chat a little, or stay afterward. All right. The useless tree.
Here's usage, Chuang. I have a big tree, the kind they call a stink tree. The tree is so distorted, so full of knots, no one can get a straight plank out of it. The branches are so crooked, you cannot cut them up. And anyway, that makes sense. There it stands beside the road. No carpenter will even look at it. Such is your teaching, big and useless. Chuang Tzu replied, have you ever watched the wildcat crouching? Watching his prey. This way it leaps, and that way, high and low, and at last it lands in the trap. Have you ever seen the yak? Great as a thundercloud. He stands in his might. Big, sure. He can't catch mice. Your big tree, no use? Then plant it in the wasteland in emptiness. Walk idly around. Rest under its shadow. No axe or bill prepares its ends. No one will ever cut it down. Useless? You should worry.
What is a yak? Do y'all have yaks in the Netherlands, Oscar?
I'm not sure what it is. It sounds like the ugly animal from the Lion King.
It's a big old hairy cow.
I'm gonna Google it.
It's got long
yeah, we
hair.
have them. We have some of them in near the sea, where they walk around wild, but actually are cultivated. But there are a couple of them.
They've got antlers too. Okay, that makes sense. Okay, let's go back to the first of this thing. And you notice the difference of how Chuang approaches this versus the Tao Te Ching. Itsu said to Chuang, I have a big tree, the kind they call a stink tree. The trunk is so distorted, it's full of knots. No one can get a straight plank out of it. The branches are so crooked, you cannot cut them up in any way that makes sense. So in other words, it's of no use, the useless tree, right? So he's saying, I have this big tree that's of no use whatsoever. Is what I'm hearing. Correct? Is that what y'all are hearing in that?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. This tree's of no use. There it stands beside the road. No carpenter will even look at it. There it stands beside the road. No carpenter will even look at it. All the use he can see in the tree, he's single-minded. Hui Su is single-minded. I know I'm butchering those pronunciations, so just give me grace. He's single-minded. He appears to only have one use for the tree, which would be how to use the wood. He probably had a carpenter look at it, thinking he could sell it, but it's of no monetary value. Or maybe cut it up for wood. And he says, no, I can't do that even, because it's so crooked. And no one will even consider it being of value. Oscar?
Yeah, and I think it's a wonderful line that follows up, and it says, "Such is your teaching, big and useless." This morning, I had a meeting where we read, I don't know the translation in English, but something like how AA grew up, or something. I don't know if I translate, or the English original is, or what the English original is. But we read about the traditions, and then they had in their history a certain point where they could get actually quite rich, and they had to make a choice: are we going for the monetary system and earn money with this, or do we stay poor? And then the decision came that from spiritual principles, they decided to stay consciously poor. So it's of no use to anybody. It's a spiritual program which is of no use because, yeah, what can you buy from it? That's the question actually. What can you buy from this tree? Nothing. So it's useless. And it reminds me of our program and our 12 steps. It's a spiritual process, and the use of it is not economical visible, or not obviously economical visible, at least. So that's how it resonated with me. Thanks.
Thanks, Oscar. It's interesting how he took something physical and compared it to something spiritual. He said, you see this tree, and he goes into this heavy explanation of how the tree is useless, and so is your teaching. Bam! So is your teaching. It's big and useless. Reminds me of comparing my intention with someone else's actions, of how paradoxical truth is.
What's that? Comparing your intentions to somebody else's actions? Can you give an example of that?
Yeah. I judge you by what you do. I judge myself by what I intend to do. I'll cut me slack. I can't see what their intentions were. I just see what they did.
Mm-hmm.
I can take Lou?
We used to have a reminder at work. We said, what's the MRI? What's the most respectful interpretation of somebody else's actions? Because we usually jump to the most disrespectful interpretation of their actions.
Yeah, I rarely give, it's getting better. Give folks the benefit of the doubt was not my mode.
Buddy, did you say the benefit of the doubt or the benefit of the Tao?
I now I try to err on the side you're talking about, Lou. But the paradox of truth, yeah, I can see that. One of the Course in Miracles for this week lessons fits that too. Nothing I see means anything. I do not understand anything I see. These thoughts do not mean anything. How about this one? I'm never upset for the reason I think. I see the tree and I think it's useless, but I see this, I see my actions and I think that's what's going on, but there's really something else going on. Now here's Schwantz's reply. Have you ever watched the wildcat crouching, watching his prey? This way it leaps and that way, high and low, and at last lands in the trap. Have you seen the yak, great as a thundercloud? He stands in his might, big sure he can't catch mice. Really more of, can I see this differently? Maybe the biggest, I think, that's Course in Miracles too. How many times have I looked at situations in my life and missed the real gift by being so narrow-minded and thinking I have the value of what's going on all figured out? Oscar?
Yeah, it also seems to be a reply on the phrase, such is your teaching, big and useless. So what he says is, you watch at my teaching from the wrong perspective. So if you don't see what it's for, you think it's useless. But if you see it from the right angle, you can sit in its shadow. You can rest under its shadow for a long time because nobody will cut it down because you can't make anything out of it. I think this phrase, such as your teaching, big and useless, is center of the verse and the difference between spirituality and materialism. Because if we are on a spiritual path, we know it's of use. It's of use for our environment, for our family, for our sponsors, for our fellows. It's of use, definitely, only it's not so obvious and it's not in a materialistic way. Thanks.
Thank you, Oscar. Drew?
Yeah, I agree with Oscar about the crux of this story being that phrase, this tree is just like your teachings, big and useless. The way I see the comparisons to the big cat and the yak, Chuang is saying, if you try to follow teachings that are clever and cunning like the cat, then all that cleverness gets you is caught in a trap. And if you try to follow teachings that are just full of big words and solid, simple pronouncements, this is the right way to live, this is what you need to do, then when any little situation comes along that throws you off, you're not going to know what to do with it. That's what I see with the yak and the mouse. The yak's the just big, strong, simple teaching, and those aren't really helpful when even the tiniest little problem comes up. But the crooked words, I think that's mentioned in the Tao Te Ching a couple times. The words that seem crooked are actually straight, something like that. These crooked words, these useless words, are the ones that you can find shelter, that rejuvenate you, that give you relaxation, that give you shelter from a storm. And I know I've bringing that back to sobriety, especially with the cat, trying to be really clever with my sobriety, trying to put together just the right rules to live by, when I can use something, under what circumstances I can use something, what time of day is the right time to start. The more clever I try to be about it, the worse it ends up going. And similarly, if I try to live by big, strong, unchangeable, unquestionable rules, then that just gets me in trouble too. So that's what I get from this verse is, the cat being the traps that we set ourselves up to fall into when we're just trying to be way too clever, and the little problems that vex us when we try to apply big, broad, simple rules that are ultimately not able to help us deal with the little day-to-day problems we encounter. So that's what I get out of this story. I really like it. I like the metaphors that Chomsky uses.
Thank you, Drew. We're never seeing the whole picture, are we? We can look at this two ways, really. We can look at it inwardly, applying to us, and then we can look at it outwardly in dealing with other people.
When we put it outwardly, as you say, the best way actually seems to be a complete lack of judgment, right? That's what you mean?
Yeah, open-heartedness, Oscar, I think is
Yeah.
open-hearted, open-mindedness, I think is if I had to put my finger on one real gift of sobriety, it was that idea of being open to others' opinions. Was there another way to look at this? Can I see this differently? That was
Yeah.
not part of my vocabulary.
Yeah. Always answer with love. I saw this Ken Wapnick video this week where he explains about the Course in Miracles, where he explains that when someone is angry to you, it's a call for love. So when someone calls for love, you respond with love. And when someone comes to you with love, you obviously also answer with love. So actually, he's saying that's the only thing you should do. Answer everything with love. And it's the same as an open heart, I think.
How do we do that, Oscar, in a situation where, let's say someone's, a business situation. You have an employee that's not doing their job. They're trying to take advantage of the situation. How do you respond in love to that situation?
First of all, you're never upset for the reason you think. That's
Okay.
number one. So then already, if you apply this and you pause, or how I do it, I pause. That's the first thing. And in this pause, I realize I'm never upset for the reason I think. So my upset has nothing to do with this other person and his actions or her actions. And then I realize, okay, whatever somebody is doing, I'm doing to myself because we are all one. So then I try to soften it, soften my heart, soften my muscles, soften everything, and open it up and try to respond with love as it comes in the moment. And that can be, it's not about the action itself. So there is no one option of reaction. That can be different for every person because in every situation, an expression of love can have another outcome. So it's not the form, but content. The content is love. As long as the content is love, I'm okay. It doesn't really matter in which form. So if I have to fire someone, or if I have to, maybe even kill someone, it doesn't really matter. It's the form.
I wasn't taking it that far.
No, I don't recommend it. I don't recommend it, but it could be possible in
There's
theory.
another way to look at that, Oscar.
So the form is not important because the form is the illusion, per definition. If you follow Course in Miracles.
Yeah. So you could fire someone in love.
Yeah, definitely.
That's what I'm after. Because
Definitely.
people listening to this say, oh, that doesn't work. And that's not, that's looking at the tree as useless when that's a perfect example of that, but it is useful. Yeah, that's good, Oscar. Thank you.
Thank you.
Drew?
Yeah, I do have to do that at my job. I've been in charge of a team for 4 years now, and I've got to look at their performance and metrics and all that. Every now and then I have somebody who just isn't doing the work. And I've handled that in different ways depending on what's going on in my life, how well I'm doing. And when I've handled it I haven't consciously thought, how do I handle this with love? But in the times when I think I have handled it, somewhat lovingly, it's been calling the employee and saying, "Hey, these are the numbers I'm seeing, and am I seeing those right? Is there something I'm missing? No, I'm looking at this right. Okay, tell me what's going on. What's You're supposed to be doing these many tasks a day, and you're falling well short of that. What's going on?" It can be as simple as, I'm just really not sure how to do it, and I've been embarrassed to ask about it. Okay, well, let's do some training. Are you free right now? Can I help you out? What do you need help with? Or, this guy really gets it, and let me have you shadow him for a little while and ask him some questions. There was also one instance of one of my employees was saying, "No, I've got everything down. Okay, you're still coming up way short. What's going on?" "Oh, nothing's going on. So something's happening." And she started crying and said, "I'm sorry, but my son's going through just really bad health problems, and I'm just really struggling with it, and it's really hard to keep my focus." So we talked about that, and I set her up with our company's employee assistance program, and she called them and started getting some regular therapy to help her deal better with what's going on in her life. And she her work improved after that. So those have been instances where, coming at it from a perspective of, let's see what's going on. Let's ask them what's going on, rather than telling them, "Hey, here's your numbers you have to meet. You're not meeting them. You will start meeting those numbers or else." That's not a loving way to do it. That's not how I would want to be treated. I'd want to be asked, "How can I help you succeed? What's going on with you? Tell me a little about your life." And that's so much better for me, so much better for them. I'd much rather have somebody under me get a little bit of training and get better, or get some therapy and become a better worker, than fire them and have to train somebody brand new from scratch who I don't know what they're capable of. I don't know what's going on in their lives. It's so much better for everybody when you can just get to know the other person, what's going on with them, not just work, at home or with friends or with family, rather than telling them, "Here's how you're disappointing me, and you will stop disappointing me or else." And that's not a loving way to handle the situation. And I'm sure you're
Sometimes it
probably,
takes that though, Drew. Sometimes you
uh,
have to say, "Hey, someone's got to we got to have some relief here."
uh-huh,
Sometimes you have to get to that point. But if I can do that without anger, though,
mm-hmm,
that's one part of this too.
mm-hmm,
I had an employee that one time, when she saw that we were getting on, like there was some division there, I was, thinking one, she said, "Hey, wait a minute." She said, "I'm on your side. Let's figure this out."
uh-huh, yeah,
She would use that phrase.
yeah,
And it taught me that with any, I have fired people before and been on their side. Listen, this is what we've got to do. I don't think you're able to do it. I don't know of what else we can do. Bring myself over to where they are and try to seek a solution together.
mm-hmm.
And if there's not a solution, then uh, we've came to a solution. Lou?
This talk reminds me of a situation I had where we had an employee that we were doing customer follow-up just to see how satisfied they were with the employee that we had. And they were showing up of having been very successful in terms of the interventions that we had provided. So we're following up with them to see how things were going, and mentioned the employee's name, and they're like, "Who? Who's that?" When it was our primary contact with them. And so we're thinking, okay, what's going on here? Is he just randomly picking people and saying that he served them, or what's happening? And we looked at all of the situations, and it was frequently we would call them up and talk to them, and they'd say, "Who's Forrest? I don't know who Forrest is." And well, that put on all kinds of red flags and concern of what's going on here. And when we pause, like Oscar talked about, and step back and look at everything, what we found out was that somehow this guy was delivering excellent services, usually through some other process than what was the correct way of doing it. Nothing illegal, nothing against agency policy, just really weird way of doing things. But his customers were really happy with what they got and how things were going for them. And he was doing really well by all of the end metrics that we had. He just wasn't using the right processes. And there were people calling for his head right away, quickly. And sometimes, as we've talked about here, you got to slow down a little bit and look at things from a different perspective. So he ended up keeping his job, and we got off his back.
Thank you, Lou. Like my sponsor taught me on amends, I start those conversations with something I appreciate in that person. I can find something I appreciate in everyone if I sit long enough and consider it. This is verse 41, one section of this, the Stephen Mitchell translation. The path into the light seems dark. The path forward seems to go back. The direct path seems long. True power seems weak. True purity seems tarnished. True steadfastness seems changeable. True clarity seems obscure. The greatest seem unsophisticated. The greatest love seems indifferent. The greatest wisdom seems childish. The Tao is nowhere to be found, yet it nourishes and completes all things. That word seems, like your situation, Lou, it seems this guy's not doing his job, but he was. I'm sure y'all made some corrections on how he handled that so you wouldn't have that problem in the future. But the end result was there. Can I see this differently? Am I seeing all the facts, but am I open to all of this rather? And for me personally, situations in let's draw it down to us. Am I seeing this situation in its fullness? Can I sit with it and maybe get a little more clarity on what's going on rather than just judging at face value? Drew?
Yeah, those lines from chapter 41 remind me of the lines from chapter 45, especially the two: true perfection seems imperfect and true straightness seems crooked. I think those are very applicable to the tree metaphor. What the carpenter is seeing as imperfect is actually perfect, and what the carpenter sees as crooked is actually straight.
Thank you, Drew. I stopped at 43. I didn't go on. I found one. I'll stop there. Thank you. That one's even better. So for your big tree, this is his final phrase. So for your big tree, no use, then plant it in the wasteland in emptiness. Walk idly around, rest under its shadow. No axe or bill prepares its end. No one will ever cut it down. Useless, you should worry. Yeah, he had it all wrong. Oscar?
That reminds me of another lesson of the Course in Miracles, which is I can see peace instead of this. That's what he's doing with the tree. And it's actually what we can do with everything, with every upset inside ourselves, with every wrong we see in the world. It's the judgment, which is in a way, and always desiring for economical profits. So it's actually ego which is in the way. And if you look beyond the ego, we can find peace, which is always there, which is always in the present moment, which is always here. So we can always apply this. I can always apply this lesson to anything. Whatever happens, I can see peace instead of this. And also on a very practical level, like a tree. You start with desiring a tree must be this and this, and then it's useful. So this one is useless. And then he applies, I can see peace instead of this. And you just think of the blessings the tree can give you. Thanks.
Thank you. Lou.
Yeah, this ending wraps it all up for me in terms of everything that went forward. It's like each for its own use. If you're looking for commercial uses and those kinds of things, then maybe you don't want this tree. If you're looking for spiritual uses, this may be the tree for you. If you're in the failure part where everything's falling apart and you need sanctuary, you need to get out of the heat, you need to rest for a while, you need to draw strength, then this is the tree for you. And it reminds me of what Oscar was talking about in early AA, by deciding if it was going to be a commercial thing or a spiritual thing. I'm not saying they can't be both, but I can't imagine Al-Anon where it's a subscription basis and every month they promise you're going to reach this level of sobriety. In 3 weeks, you will have lost 10% of your desire. It can be financially useless, but spiritually priceless. That's what I draw from the tree.
Thank you, Lou.
Derek. Yeah, I like this story. The thing about the yak versus the tiger, I think it is interesting because the yak is a herbivore, doesn't even eat mice. And if you're looking at it like, look, he can't even catch a mice. It doesn't even eat mice. But we may not know that. I had to Google it. I don't know much about yaks. I knew what it was, though, and it was a big animal like a cow. And then, yeah, the tree thing's interesting, too, because the idea of a tree is it's only good for lumber, for building things, and we're going to chop it down, and this crappy tree's crooked, and then it turns out, I think this is what you guys are already talking about, like you get stuck in a desert, and it's the only tree around with shade. Then it's pretty useful. So I like this story because it's like what your perception is not the whole story, but it feels like it all the time. And so it just reminds me on a personal level, like how my perception feels like everything, of course, and that's maybe pretty common. But lately I've been catching myself sometimes telling myself, what if everything's okay? And I'm completely wrong. And maybe that's coming from meditation. I have no idea. And I'm not saying I do it every time, but I've noticed this story, reading this story is making me remember that I've done it a few times recently where I'll just be like, oh, this is going wrong in my head. I'm thinking, this is all going wrong. He's not doing what I think they should do, or whatever. The tree's not what I think it is. And then I think, what if actually everything's fine and it's all working out? And it feels so different in my body. And I'm like, well, that felt good to think that. But why don't I just do that all the time? I can't explain it, but I don't. But it's a good story. I like the story.
Thank you, Derek. Had a sponsee just a couple of weeks ago. He had a situation come up and he forgave some family members that had really wronged him. And he said, I had to fight myself doing it because I felt like I'd given up, that I was a coward, that all these things, like we do sometimes when we choose to act in compassion rather than, add to our fear. And he said eventually, but I felt so much better, even though I was thinking of myself as a coward for not, in a way, he was thinking not standing up for himself. And the more we talked about it, he realized that was the ultimate standing up for himself, was forgiving, because it brought forgiveness in his life. This also reminds me of the idea of, am I looking outwardly at things to give me the peace and joy that can only come from within? That's some of the comparison between the two, I think. Him comparing Chauncey's teaching, comparing the Tao to the tree. And it also reminded me, I was out in the desert. I used to four-wheel with my son a week every fall. We were out somewhere in South Texas, and there was a tree I saw coming up on the tree. I said, oh, man, I know if I was, you imagine yourself years and years ago, because, we were out doing the wagon trail going in Southern California. We did 100 miles of it, the original trail. And there's this tree, and we were coming up on it. I said, man, I could imagine it years and years ago how much I'd like shade in this part of and when we got to the tree, everywhere under the tree that the shadow was cactus, about a foot tall, 2 feet tall. You could not get under the tree without stepping on cactus. And I'm like, oh, I would be so disappointed if I saw this tree way off. And I said, but you know what? It's useful to the cactus.
Mm-hmm.
You could take the attitude of cutting all the cactus down so you could use it. That's a use for the tree, yes, but it is being used now. So there were no cactus out because it was too barren and too dry, but they could survive under the tree.
Yeah, what was it you said earlier about red pine? The success leads to the Tao, and failure leads to the Tao. It's just quicker.
Success and failure both lead to the way, but the path of failure is shorter.
Yeah, shorter. So sometimes you got to step on some cactus to to get there.
Yeah. Why did he say at that very last sentence, you should worry? Useless? You should worry that you don't have this figured out, maybe?
You have a narrow mind.
Yes. Is there another use for this tree? This seeming failure in my life, can I find another use for this? Or better yet, this success I'm having in my life, can I find another use for this? Am I seeing my success as I should? It's so easy for me when I'm successful, I don't investigate because I think I've got it figured out because I like the outcome. But when I start failing, I start looking at it really close and say, well, what am I seeing here? Am I seeing this the right way because it's a failure? Drew?
Yeah, what you just said about is what I'm doing successful. That reminds me of the lines in the Tao Te Ching about if people didn't laugh at it, it wouldn't be the Tao.
Yes.
Don't look at what you're doing through other people's eyes. Is my sobriety working for me? Don't listen to the people who say you're more fun when you drink, or I don't trust people who don't drink, or you should a little bit of alcohol is actually good for you. What's good for you, what works for you. Don't rely on what other people tell you other than the people you trust, their lived experiences. That's just what that reminded me of, is the foolish man hears of the Tao, he laughs. The carpenter being the foolish man and the tree being the Tao.
Thank you, Drew.
Buddy, what comes up for me is this at the very end here, it says useless, you should worry. And what I keep going to is if I'm just so stuck in my ways and I'm not open, sooner or later, I'm going to start isolating myself. So it's been a good conversation. I've soaked a lot of it up. Thank you.
Yeah, that's one of the first go-tos for me too, Brian. Maybe for all of us is I start isolating. I stop doing what's working, which is community, which is connection. I've seen first my connection with the higher power starts in years past. I haven't. This is times I've seen that I've had a slip of some type, or even a mental, emotional slip. I lose my connections with the higher power, or start diminishing. Don't go to as many meetings. I don't get out as much. I don't call folks as much. I don't call my sponsor as much. All those things, all those little ways I connect, those start lowering. And when my defenses are lowered, or my surrender is lowered, I guess would be a way to say it, because if I'm not connecting with you, I think I have it figured out. I don't need you. I'm saying I don't need you when I don't connect with you. My actions are saying that. So if I'm ever struggling, or if I've got a sponsee that's struggling, what I do is I step back and say, okay, what have I stopped doing that works for me? What worked in the beginning that I'm not doing now? How is it that I connect with a higher power? However that is, I need to do more of it, whatever that might be. For me at the moment, it's meditation mostly. So what do? I meditate more. Really simple. I don't skip my readings that I do. I do my readings. Good stuff. Anything else before we close? Next week's story will be a hat salesman and a capable ruler. We will see what comes of a hat salesman and a capable ruler next week.
Hello, this is Buddy C. I wanted to make you aware of several recovery-related resources that I've posted in the episode description. These resources include a list of recovery podcasts, a free sober meditation app, daily recovery email, shared Google recovery calendars. Hope you put some of these resources to use and have a great week.
Thank you for listening to the Tao of Our Understanding Recovery Podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, please share it with your friends in recovery.